Get out of the car.
Yeah, how the fuck am I gonna get out of that car?
Yeah, it's not about your charge. It's about your. It goes deeper than that. It's about your network, who you associate with, your probation.
I would like you all to meet young Billy. Billy is 15 years young. He loves baseball, going out with his friends, pornography. One night, young Billy fell in with the wrong crowd. A group of young rascals somehow convinced Billy that it would be a good idea to go out breaking into people's cars and stealing whatever the poor asshole who owned it had to offer. Loose change, sunglasses, iPods, shit like that. Billy promised to never break the law again. After all, he'd only committed one crime. But what Billy didn't know was that an advanced algorithm had determined that his whole network of friends, who happened to all be a bunch of John Stamoses for some reason, had lengthy criminal records, and the algorithm determined that Billy was likely to commit more crimes in the future. This, my friends, is called predictive policing. You know all that data they've been collecting on us to sell us ads? Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but that's all being used to determine who's the next criminal, who's probably a black guy. This is the digital dystopia, stopping crime before it happens. The first ever predictive policing software, Predictive, was based off of the science of seismology, which is the branch of science concerned with predicting earthquakes and other hilarious natural disasters. The software collects a wide array of crime data, such as where and when most crimes are committed, and it helps to create a virtual map to help officers become better prepared to know where to be and when the actual crimes are being committed. For instance, most restaurants tend to make sure they're stocked up on food and ingredients and that they're fully staffed up on the weekends because they know that those are the days where everybody's eating out with their family. Predictive works on a similar notion, except it's not food, it's heroin. The software may notice trends that certain times of the month more drug possession crimes are being committed because the first Friday of every month when anybody of any race is cashing their government check. Maybe robberies tend to be committed more on the tail end of the month when there aren't any welfare checks and people need money. Whoever invented such a thing like Predictive, I find myself wondering, what did they expect to do once they figure out how to predict crime? So far, it seems they've got a pretty good excuse now to harass people who a computer deems a potential criminal. So what do they do to the people who they think are potential criminals? Jump out of the bushes and say, "Hey, don't rob that liquor store"? Well, I must warn you, it is far worse.
Since being sheriff, working with our deputies, we've implemented progressive, proactive enforcement tactics such as intelligence-led policing.
This is Pasco County's very own Chris Nacco, who back in 2011 was one of the first to implement such a draconian form of policing in the United States of America, which he seems to take great pride in. Little did the county of Pasco know that for the next 5 years he would ensnare over 1,000 helpless people into wishing they were never born. When I asked earlier what police would do with a person who their algorithm detected was a repeat offender, a Pasco County deputy who has now quit the police force said, and I quote, "Make their lives miserable until they move or sue." I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the conspiracy theory called gang stalking or targeted individuals.
Here comes the gang stalking helicopter.
But to quickly boil it down, certain people believe that the government is spearheading a harassment campaign against them that involves behavior such as stalking them 24/7, purposefully flying over their house with helicopters, cutting their internet or power, having multiple cars lay on their horn every time they pass their house. I don't believe such a thing exists, but if it did, what I'm about to tell you is easily the closest thing to it as humanly possible. Of all of the examples of people harassed by the Pasco County Sheriff's Office from 2011 to the present day, Rio Wachteki's story stands out the most. The 15-year-old became a target of Sergeant Nako's harassment campaign after being arrested for sneaking into carports with his friends in order to steal motorized bicycles. The kid was already on probation and most likely looking to reform himself, but it didn't stop the Pasco County Sheriff's Office from visiting his house 21 times in the span of 4 months. 21 times. Deputies even acknowledged that the boy wasn't getting into trouble, but they still continued to grill him and show up to his house unannounced to harass him, even about issues related to his friends. I mean, this may sound like standard protocol, until it absolutely doesn't. They even showed up at his mom's work multiple times, and went as far as camping outside of his gym to see if they could snag him there. I guess to play devil's advocate and try to see it from the police department's point of view, their logic is, prevent crime via death by 1,000 paper cuts? I know if cops showed up to my house in the middle of the night 21 times in 4 months, I'd be a psychological mess, weaned down mentally into a little nub. Sure, it stops them from committing petty crimes, but at what point does the victim of harassment such as this go apeshit with an AR-15 in the nearest Walmart parking lot? And you're probably thinking, if the cops don't have probable cause, what can they do to successfully charge someone? There have been cases of Pasco County PD going outside somebody's front yard with a ruler to write tickets for overgrown grass. Or something as trivial as writing a ticket for not having the right mailbox numbers on the mailbox. What makes this even worse is that they often do it in the middle of the night to embarrass families in front of all their neighbors. And like 1 out of 10 of their targets happen to be juveniles as young as 14 years old.
Pops can't help you. Who brought your pop here today?
Where is you? Oh, you scared to go somewhere without your father?
No, my dad offered to go. Shut the fuck up.
I mean, I want to be clear here. I'm not one of these crazy abolish the police protesters. I often like to think that I have like a voice of reason regarding these matters, but right here, this is some insane level of It feels like the definition of what makes a person racist since the year 1990 has changed quite a bit. It used to be you have to check a certain amount of boxes to be considered a full-fledged racist, and now it seems like they remove one of the check boxes every 3 years, narrowing it down to a thinner and thinner selection to qualify a true and heartless racist. I'm a firm believer that injecting race into every political issue does nothing but make minorities look weak and helpless, and the only thing it does successfully is pin whites and blacks against each other. I believe that every time there's an example of minorities being discriminated against, it does nothing but create racial tribalism in situations where it otherwise wouldn't have. But to play devil's advocate, I feel like it's my responsibility to point out that a system that requires sniffing out criminals before they commit a crime is, in fact, kind of racist if you think about it. Hear me out.
One of the major problems with predictive policing is that it relies on what we call dirty data. And this is data produced by police departments and other external data. What happens when this type of data is ingested into a predictive policing technology is that it leads to what is known as a confirmation feedback loop.
So what this girl is saying is correct. If you choose to look at crime data as based on class other than based on race, what you're going to get is crime data that accidentally insinuates that more crime is being committed by people of a certain skin color, as opposed to determining it more as a class-based rating system. As unfortunate as this is, this means that the police are going to follow an artificial intelligence-based monitoring system that notices that more crime is being committed in areas that are primarily filled up with minorities. So it is going to target people of color, more than white people. I mean, that much is obvious. It's going to happen, and as far as I'm concerned, it already is. The worst part is the police who are doing this to minorities have stated that they have an obligation to tell a targeted person that they're being watched, but they're not doing that. They're probably all too aware of how much of a shitstorm that would brew up in the media.
The problem is the public has no way of knowing who's being targeted.
It is one part social control, hey, we're watching you, and it's one part information collection. We are seeing who you're associating with, the car you're driving, who you're hanging out with, your neighborhood, and they're recording all of that and putting it back into a larger, ever-growing database.
The question of why our data is being collected, where is it going, and who's using it seems to have slowly begun to reveal itself over the past few years. I believe that our data being used to determine whether or not we're a potential future criminal is but a small ingredient in an otherwise bigger recipe that isn't going to lie dormant for much longer. That is, unless we stop fighting each other constantly and start laying down some ground rules on what can be considered unconstitutional. It disappoints me that this year, out of any other time in history, had the potential to start a national conversation on unjust police activity, and within a week after the murder of George Floyd, the narrative jumped immediately to, let's abolish the police, which is like saying, there have been a few shark attacks, so let's drain the ocean. The question on whether or not this technology works is practically irrelevant, and like a great man once said, those who sacrifice freedom for safety deserve neither. And remember, this affects everyone. At first, while looking this up, it kinda bothered me that every video regarding the topic focused mainly on how this will affect minorities, and I must reiterate, the only reason that this bothers me is because I've thus far sat back and watched an all-out race war unfold in America, and I place the blame on the media putting so much focus on the topic of racial inequality. But hey, if highlighting the racial angle of this unconstitutional mess is what it takes to stop a system like this from falling into place, then go right ahead. Whatever it takes. If you like this video and want to see more on the discussion of dystopian trends that happen to be digital, subscribe to my channel. Or don't. It's up to you. Also, leave a like and a comment, but you can also not do that. Speaking of collecting data, as we can see here, our little champ Billy is participating in one of his all-time favorite American pastimes, watching pornography. What young Billy doesn't realize is we're collecting that data too. That's right, Billy. We know your favorite genre, point of view. You see, young Billy likes pretending it's him giving young ladies the old in-out, in-out. We can watch him doing that through his webcam. What do you think of that, Billy?